Welcome to the Back to the Garden podcast, the podcast discussing early years. This podcast is inspired by our nursery, Back to the Garden Childcare, a natural, child-led nursery in Broadheath and Lynn. Children are the future, so how do we give them the best start? I'm your host, Sadie Pickering, actress and voiceover artist, and also the daughter of two of the founders. On the show, we'll be diving into ways to nurture children in their early years. We'll be meeting with parents, child development experts, and entrepreneurs in the sector. How can we forge a natural approach in this modern world? Join us to find out. We're here with a new series, which is also filmed, so definitely check out our new YouTube channel. We are Stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. Alistair Bryce-Clegg has spent the last 31 years working in early years as a practitioner, a head teacher and a consultant. He's an expert in the field and recognised nationally and internationally. He's published 23 books and his TED Talk was watched by thousands. He also featured in BAFTA award-winning documentary on Channel 4 called Old People's Home for 4-year-olds. And he set up ABC Does, where you can learn more about all that he offers, including conferences, courses, blogs, resources, and his books you can find there too. His most recent creation is a child development app for parents called My First 5 Years, which he co-founded with Jenny Johnson, MBE. He's a father of three boys, and he's clearly a very busy man and very in demand, so we're so grateful that he's taken the time out to come and chat to us today. So, Alistair, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
You are very welcome. You made me sound dead impressive.
You are impressive.
And old.
I told you. I feel like Michael Parkinson with this. I had so many questions to begin with, because you've had such an interesting life and career so far, but definitely not old. And there was just so much I could ask you, so I've whittled them down, and we've got some.
And I'm just happy to chat.
We can go off-piste as well, which is absolutely fine. So the first question, though, that we ask all our guests is, what's your earliest childhood memory or a pivotal moment for you during your childhood?
So I'm not sure. I'm really interested in the idea of kind of implanted memory and the fact that for lots of us, when we look at child development, when memory actually kicks in, some of the things we think we remember, we don't actually remember. And of course, I'm from the generation of photo albums, because you couldn't flick through your phone and look. So we used to have lots in the house and spend lots of time on rainy days going through photo albums. But one memory that I think is a real memory, I must have been about 2.5, 3-ish, and still been looked after by my granny, but pushed around in a big Silver Cross pram. And it was quite large, but I lived in a little mining village in the northeast of England, and we went over in this pram. And she'd gone to take her weekly allowance out from the post office in the village, and she parked me up outside a shop when she went in. And she said what she'd done was to tuck the money underneath the mattress. It was a different time. It was the early 70s. And she came out of the shop to find me having taken the money out, and was liberally then scattering the money around the outside of the pram. So this is a story she told many, many times. So whether it's an implanted memory or not, it's definitely a memory that I've got, and it's probably the earliest one that I can kind of remember.
It's so interesting. Our first guest in this series, Hannah, talked about the earliest childhood memory. If you're thinking of it, if you're from your perspective looking out, then it's a real memory. Whereas if you're looking inwards, on yourself from the outside, then it's from a picture or something else.
Interesting. No, this feels like it's real. And I don't remember the throwing of the money. I remember the trouble afterwards.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I can't remember sitting there scattering £5 notes or pound notes as there would have been then. I remember the horror, and I think the drama of people picking up the money and handing it back to my grandma, and her being a bit cross, maybe.
You must have cross about you in the Silver Cross.
In the Silver Cross pram, scattering money around.
Oh, that's a good memory. Yeah, and so interesting. Like, it's just interesting what comes up for us, isn't it?
And you tend to remember the weird stuff.
Yeah.
I was talking to my youngest son the other day, because he's had a drama with one of his friends who was ill on a night out. And I said, oh, that must have been quite a trauma. And he said, well, if you think about your life as like a stamp collection, and you only really remember key bits of it, they're like the stamps in your stamp collection. And he said, no, just this one I'll never forget it, because it was quite a traumatic night when you were 18. But he said, it'll just go in as one of my stamps. So that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. A bit like a patchwork quilt, I suppose. But
Yeah.
your memories tend to be. But then also, interestingly, for me, I'm doing some research at the moment for the very end of my doctorate. And I've been going into schools as a researcher, not as a practitioner. And that's been really interesting and very challenging. But what I found is, through the sort of research that I'm doing, loads of memories have come up for me that I had completely forgotten about. So I was in a setting where they'd made mint Play-Doh and somebody had been a little heavy-handed with a peppermint, and as you do, so walked in and was kind of knocked out by this really heady scent of peppermint. I also had a headache, as I said in my field notes, and I'd sat on the floor with some children, and I had this kind of memory of being about 9 in junior school, and we'd made peppermint creams for Mother's Day. And I mean, I don't remember them making the peppermint creams. What I do remember was that on the way home, I went under a railway bridge, and I actually managed to find a picture of by the village I grew up in, the railway bridge, and I ate one because I desperately wanted to try it, and we weren't allowed to touch them in school because they were for mums for Mother's Day. And then I remembered the guilt of having eaten it, and I carried that guilt for quite a long time. But then I'm talking about, nearly 50 years ago, forgot that memory until 40 odd years later, sitting on the floor in a reception classroom, inhaling somebody's over minty dough, and suddenly you're back there and think, where has that been all of these years? It's just sat in there somewhere.
It's a sensory connection, isn't it, that
it's
joins
amazing.
the dots.
So all those memories that we regularly remember through tradition, and then things that just pop up every now and then because something just triggers it.
I'd love to hear more about your time doing the research as well, because I hadn't realised that you're doing that now, so that'd be interesting to touch on later.
I'm doing ethnographic research, so rather than doing data-driven stuff, it's about trying to put yourself, it's not going in and pretending to be for, but it's about trying to situate yourself in the space with the children as opposed to being an onlooker into the space.
Yeah.
But also I spent my entire career, especially the latter bit of it, supporting and advising practitioners, everything from kind of childminders right the way through to schools and nurseries. So to go in and not be in that capacity and not make those judgments and try and turn that voice off in your head that's constantly looking to get into the kind of the real sense of what the children are doing, I thought was going to be dead easy, but I actually found it really, really difficult.
It's learning again and receiving.
It is, and also when you're there as a researcher. So one example I had was a child in one of the settings that I was working in. I was on the floor and there was a group of children I'm trying to watch and listen and kind of not interact very much. And she came up and went, is your name Mr. Poohead? As they do when they're 4. And of course, I had to just quell every urge that I had. And what was really interesting for me reflecting was, what would I have done as an early practitioner? What would I have done as a head teacher? What would I have done as a consultant? What would, as an adult in that situation, what do you say? Do you just ignore it? Do you say, how very dare you? Do you say, well, that's rude or what? But I just had to keep it buttoned and allow the interaction to happen. So it's been a real journey for me, not only in terms of learning loads about child development and education, but also challenging a lot of my own preconceptions about what it is to be a best practice practitioner, how we respond to children, how we are trained as educators to respond to children in a way that's not always the most appropriate in terms of their development. It's been a really interesting process.
Fascinating. So staying in your childhood then for now, what was your early years education like?
So my mum was, until she retired, a teacher, but a good teacher, and we knew that because she was a year 6 teacher, and all the good teachers teach in year 6. Not like people who teach in early years, who literally are teachers who are about to retire or die. That was when I first went into teaching, that was the kind of ethos that they had around early years. Is easy because it's babies and it's just the dead little and the dead, all you do is play in the sand and read stories. So your good teachers get the hard work. And actually what we know is it's probably the complete reverse of that. So my mum taught in a junior school near us. I never went to the school that she taught in, but I went to a nursery school. And I have some vague memories of being in nursery school and it being very happy. And then I went to an infant school, an all-infant school, and then transitioned to a junior school. And I have loads of memories of being in infant school. I loved it. I loved that kind of early element. I liked school less the further through my journey I got, but I loved the early stuff.
Yeah. And now skipping ahead all the way to when you first began your career in early years, what was the reason why you were drawn to work in early years? Has it come through from your mum being a teacher?
No.
This is a question from our team. They want to know this.
I was not drawn to work in early years. I would have rather stuck needles in my eyeballs than worked in early years. So I knew I was going to teach or present on Blue Peter. I did actually write to Blue Peter when I was 11 and ask if I could be a Blue Peter presenter. And I've still got the letter that came back from the producer that basically said, there are lots of things you can do to be a Blue Peter presenter and, blah, blah, blah. And I hope to see you again, in the future when you're a little bit older. It was a really lovely letter. Never quite happened. But I knew I was going to work. There is still time. I wanted to work in education, and I wanted to work with junior age children, so what we'd now call Key Stage 2, because that's what I knew my mum did. That was all the experience that I had. And I really enjoyed that kind of age group. So I did work for a year as an unpaid classroom assistant in a school not too far from here with a year 5-6 class, getting ready to go and do my teacher training. And I loved that. And everybody kept saying, oh, you'd be really good at this. And I was like, oh, I am good at this. And then I got put into nursery to cover the nursery teacher one day because she went on a course, and it was the worst. It was only about an hour. It was about the worst hour of my life, because all the strategies that worked with children in year 5-6 don't work with a restless end of the day group of 3-year-olds who've got their coats on too early, are too hot, need a wee. And I'm trying to read a story sitting on a chair to a group of children who as they were called then, the nursery nurse, had got into their coats ready for home time. It was autumn time, so the heating was on, because in schools heating's either on or off, there's no kind of in between, and they were just slowly going puce or falling asleep. And I had a child that said, just out of the blue, I need a wee. While I'm reading Elma, I can remember what the story was, and I was just carrying on with his story, and the behaviour's all dying around me, and I'm just plodding on with Elma. And so I said to this child, well, go. In his parka, off you went to the toilet. Of course, then you get the kind of tsunami of, I need a wee. And of course you say, well, off you go. So I don't want children wetting themselves on the carpet on my watch. So I ended up with about 15 nursery children in the toilet in various stages of having a wee, and I just carried on with the story with the ones that were left. And then the end of the day, that classic thing where I didn't realise in year 5-6 you open the door and children find their parents. It didn't occur to me that with nursery age children you don't just open the door and let them go. And thankfully the nursery nurse was back, because I was like, right, all the mums are here, and she's like, wait, we have to send them out one at a time. So I literally left that one occurrence thinking, why would anybody work with children of this age? They can do nothing. They're just annoying, and they can't even go to the toilet on their own. And so I then, when I went to do my teacher training, said to my tutor, I've got experience of infants as it was early years, didn't exist in the way that it does now. And I said, I don't want to do it. I can tell you now categorically. And she said, you can't not have one teaching practice that's in infants, because it's a primary course. So what we'll do is we'll pop you in reception for the first practice, get it out of the way, and then we'll focus on Key Stage 2. And I was like, right, you're on. And I happened to end up in a school with one of the most talented practitioners I think I've ever worked with, who was just really inspirational. So I went, it's called Sally Roy, went and worked with Sally, and it was an open plan mixed reception year 1 class, beginning of the academic year. And she was just amazing what she did with these children. And what she basically also did for me was showed me that it takes a huge amount of skill and knowledge and expertise. And there is an element of being a really good practitioner that's a little bit performance, ta-da, but that on its own is just not enough. And the more you understand about how children develop, and the more you learn that, which has been for me an ongoing 30-odd year journey, then the more successful you become at the job that you do. So at the end of that 7-week practice, I basically made the decision to then specialise in early years. So my teaching ended up being primary with an early years specialism, and then got offered a job from my final teaching practice in the school where I was on teaching practice, which was an infant school, and the rest is kind of history.
Amazing. Like, so complete U-turn from what you wanted to do, what you saw yourself doing, and then it was that person, that practitioner that changed everything.
Because
for you.
when I remember phoning my mum and saying, I'm going to reception for my first teaching practice, and my mum said, what a shame. And she actually said, what a shame, what a waste. And so that was, and I don't think that would necessarily be her view now, but at the time it was like, why are they putting you in reception? Because all you're going to do is read stories. And our other bit of advice, which was good, was take your guitar. Because in moments of crisis, as long as you can play 4 chords on the guitar, you're sorted.
Do you play guitar?
I'd play 4 chords on the guitar. I can play everything from 5 Little Speckled Frogs to Lady Gaga. Anything on 4 chords. I just sing loud and strum quietly. That's what I do.
Oh, why didn't you bring your guitar today?
Well, next time.
Next time. So, that's a great journey. It's so interesting to hear, like, how it all happened and that twist. Yeah. And so then you spent 10 years working as a practitioner and then became a head teacher.
Yes.
What was that like, and what did you learn during those years that really influenced what you do today? What were the things that you picked up on, maybe the things that felt outdated or weren't serving the children?
There were lots. I think if I look back to Mr. Clegg, the teacher, in that first, we're not called an NQT, we were called probationers, and the school I taught in was lovely, but also it had cursive handwriting. And I had a mentor who was the deputy head of the school where I first started. And before I was allowed to go and eat my lunch, I had to practice the cursive writing on the roller blackboard. And I had to go and find her when I'd done the whole alphabet, capital and lowercase. She would come and check it, and she would rub out any that I hadn't done well. And I had to have a full alphabet every day for quite a while before then I was able to go and eat my lunch, to make sure that my standard of cursive writing on the board was the same standard that the school wanted to support. So at different times, certainly know things like now I know teachers rightly get release time, mentoring, support, that sort of stuff. I mean, the staff were great and I had a really good mentor in the deputy head, but it was a very different culture in teaching then. I mean, even down to the fact that on Christmas lunch, the head would bring in bottles of wine and you'd go and have your Christmas lunch, and you'd say to the middays, just keep them out an extra half hour, and then you'd have a glass of wine. Or in my very early days in teaching, everybody went to the pub on a Friday. I mean, it didn't get absolutely trolleyed in the pub, but they would have a drink and then come back. And that was common practice until somebody said, hang on a minute, should you really be having a drink at lunchtime and then coming back and, you're not allowed to operate machinery? How are you allowed to work with very young children? So the whole culture of teaching has changed, I think, and early years education, in some respects for the better, and in some respects there are elements of our early years sector now. I think, and we could talk about social media forever. I think there are lots of positive aspects of social media, but also it can be a bit of a scourge in terms of either perpetuating myths about practice that are not true, or making people feel that if you haven't got it, then, if you haven't got a mud kitchen, or if your child isn't sitting under a kind of muslin tent, or you haven't got fairy lights on a hessian hoop hanging from your ceiling with a bit of plastic ivy, then who even are you? So I think there's a lot of that where people are looking and thinking, well, I haven't got that, I need to have that because everybody else has got it. I haven't got any copper jugs in my water tray. That means my children can't be learning. When actually, of course they can. What your jug is made out of can make a difference to an aspect of learning, but actually it doesn't make you a better practitioner nor them a more successful learner. It's about understanding that. So I think loads of elements have changed. So my journey from practitioner to head was an interesting one. I think also I worked in a 3-form school, and I worked in a primary school and schools in different socio-economic areas, and I learned loads about that. Working with children is way more than just teaching, and teaching is about social work, and it's about empathy, and it's about the fact that one of the most important lessons I learned was that I'd gone into teaching thinking that as a teacher I had to like every child that I taught, and also the mantra was often, we're all friends here, and that was what you would say a lot. Well, if people thought, well, we're friends here, aren't we? And I think what I've learned over 30 odd years is you can't be expected to love every child that you teach, because they all have different personalities, and some, because of your personality, you will click with and some you won't. Your role as a practitioner is to ensure that you do the very best that you can for all the children that you have got. And also that in life, we're not all friends. So I think what's more valuable is teaching children how to resolve differences and accept differences than this blasé attitude of, well, we're just going to say we're all friends in the end and it'll all be all right, because I don't think we're given strategies for life to children.
Okay. Yeah, because they're people. And if you're in a room full of people, you're not going to love everyone in that room, are you?
But it doesn't mean to say that you've got to be mean to them, or it doesn't mean to say that it just... And I think also what I learned was that children who were often seen as challenging were the ones that I enjoyed working with most. And certainly when I was a head, we had a really, really inclusive policy that we tried to keep all of the children in mainstream education for as long as possible if it was appropriate for them. Whereas other heads that I was aware of or worked with were very much like, if a child is causing a difficulty, then the impact is obviously big and you've got to put lots of strategies in place to support that child, and that can be costly. But what you don't want to do is just move that child on. Because I think we know behaviour is not the child. Behaviour is usually the way of a child articulating something that they can't verbally express. So what's fascinating, I think, is about trying to get under that behaviour and support that child. And it's never simple, and it's often a complex range of things that are causing that child to behave in that way. But what's really interesting about child development that we're all involved in is that that's the nub of what we do. We are here to help children to develop into successful adults. So that's the fascinating bit. The ones who are really well behaved, and again we could talk about compliance and engagement for hours, they are easy. But then there's a big difference between being compliant and being engaged. And again, I see that where lots of children who behave in inverted commas because they've been taught that's the expectation are not always massively engaged with what you're talking about. So when you come round the circle and you say, "So, Charlotte," and you can see Charlotte panicking, thinking, "Oh, what? I wasn't listening. I was sitting quietly with my legs crossed and my arms folded, but I wasn't listening." I'd much rather have wriggling about or wandering about, but engaged and listening, than I would say, "Look how successful I am as a practitioner because I've managed to get 20 children all to sit in silence and listen to me."
Yeah.
So when I'm working now a lot with settings, we talk a lot about the difference between engagement and compliance, and the fact that as a profession, whether you work, again, from childminder all the way through, we are taught that if we can get children to conform, that makes us successful in what we do. So if I can get you sitting quietly on the carpet, that means I'm a successful practitioner. But it doesn't really, because my role is to develop you, to teach you, to understand you, and not all children are emotionally capable or physically capable or necessarily need to sit on the carpet with their legs crossed and their arms folded. Some children need to move and need to lie down and need to get up and need to walk about, and therefore we need to acknowledge that and build that into their unique journey.
Yeah, because we all learn in different ways.
We do. And again, our education system and what our vision of best practice is often that we don't all learn in different ways. We need to conform to the one model of what a successful practitioner looks like and what well-behaved successful learners look like. So
these boxes.
And there are loads of them.
Do you feel like that has changed now?
I think there is more discussion about it, but I still, especially, schools and nurseries that I go into, still, if somebody was coming to do a learning walk, or if Ofsted were coming in, what people worry about is, like, are my children being well behaved? And I think what's really interesting is when you can have the discussion about, can we talk about the behaviour of my children and how it links to their particular learning style? So that child there did get up and wander off, and I didn't make them come back. I didn't send the person I'm working with to do that kind of shepherd and herding thing that they do with children because so many times I've seen it and done it, where you've got some member of the team who's then sitting kind of with a child with their arms around them, listening to the story, and their child's like, "I'm going out here," and it's all becomes very tense. And also we know that how you feel about being a learner is the biggest impact on how you learn. and children learn really, really quickly. So when very early on, as early years practitioners, we're saying, right, everybody stop. Show me 10 fingers, look. And they're thinking, oh, we've all stopped. He's whispering. He's using jazz hands. He's saying, come to the carpet. It's like, this is a moment, something's going to happen, and then nothing happens. Ooh, it's time for phonics. And we're all like, oh, my bum's numb. What they learn is the next time I go, everybody stop. They're like, already, no, you're all right.
This is really interesting because I remember watching your TED Talk and that thing of magic versus fake magic.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit more about that? Like, and are you able to give some more examples?
I think there is an element of performance in all early years practitioners' kit bag. It is lovely, and one of the things I love about early years children is they will believe almost anything you say, and they're just dead honest. Although I did once work with somebody who was doing a thing with a squirrel around autumn. It's a long story, but she had a puppet squirrel on her hand that she'd popped out of a bag. Oh, here's my friend Cyril the squirrel. And of course one boy said, that is not a real squirrel, which has just then ruined the entire thing. What do you say? Well, yes it is. Or no, it's not. Just ignore the child. But they're really honest in that respect. So I think that idea of magic, the puppets, the look what I've got under here, that can be a hook to hook children in, but then that's all it is. And the thing about hooks is they wear off really quickly. So the idea of the real magic of learning, for me, on my journey, has been when I understood more about how children learn and the complexity of learning, and also challenged myself around things like preconceptions, around gender, gendered language. I mean, there's so much that we do subconsciously. There's lots of research that talks about the fact that you will deliver your teaching, and I mean by teaching any interaction that you have with a child, but you deliver in the way that you prefer to be taught. And most people who work in early years are kind of auditory, visual people, so we do a lot of talking and we show lots of images, and you've got lots of children who you'll work with that don't necessarily learn in that way. We know kinesthetic wise that the majority of children need to use their bodies. To learn to keep your body still, you've got to be able to control it, and to learn to control it, you've got to use it. So most of the children that we work with will be kinesthetic in their approach. The reason that they don't is because we try and squeeze them into little boxes that say, you have to sit, you have to be still. But actually, nature didn't program our children to be still unless they're asleep. So therefore, what we're doing often in our learning environments is pushing against that natural development of children. So the real magic comes, the real sense of engagement, when you understand how children develop and you create spaces that are linked to child development, as opposed to outcomes like early learning goals or foundation stage or phonics, or even that idea about, I talked to lots of practitioners about this. If you are going to start phonics with your children, how do you know they're ready? Can you articulate what comes before phonics? Can you articulate how children become numerate? So again, my social media is full at the moment about, people starting nursery, people starting school reception, and there are lots of tough trays with things like numbers on for children to copy over dots, and that is a really backwards approach where you're putting the end at the beginning, because a lot of us were taught as practitioners, you do your alphabet, you do your numbers, but actually the concept of number is way, way more valuable than knowing that symbol there is a 2. That can come way down the line, but being able to say, find me 2, show me 2, count me 2, bring 2, that is a sense of number that you want children to have that underpins that learning, and that's in every aspect of what they do.
Yeah, and these boxes, like I know my mum tried to really change things back. It was the 80s when they first set up Kids Unlimited, and she used to get frustrated that in early years there'd be like, it's reminding me of the shape of the 2 and getting them, but there would be like a cat that would be drawn in lines that didn't actually look like a cat, because
cats don't look like that.
Cats don't look like the way they're drawn for children. And then the children would have to copy exactly that, rather than or a person, like children draw people with a face and arms coming out of the head because that's what they see when you're going towards them. So it's trying to change how they perceive the world.
It's all of that is developmental knowledge that you can't know it all when you first go into the role of working with children. But I think what you've got to be committed to is knowing that you don't know it all and finding out as much as you can, because it is genuinely fascinating. And I think sometimes we can get stuck into ruts. Like when we think about what is best practice in the early years, what really we think of as best practice tends to be linked to Ofsted outcomes, which tend to be linked to government outcomes, which are very little to do with child development. So we've got these early learning goals that Ofsted will come and judge us on our success at reaching the percentage of children who achieve that. But the early learning goals themselves weren't linked to child development. They were linked to government targets about closing the gap for what the government were calling at the time disadvantaged children. So you've got a whole community that are working to outcomes that are not actually driven by child development. They're driven by government initiative. And the idea of how good you are in your role as an educator is directly linked to how successful you are in keeping children on a path to that goal. And actually, it's the reverse. There's so much more that doesn't feature in early learning goals or outcomes. It's just about the unique journey of the unique child.
But all that pressure that's put on the nurseries and the practitioners means that they're not able to explore that stuff because they're bogged down. So what you're doing is really helping to change that. So how are you finding the difference between that those 10 years where you're hands-on, you're working with the children, and now you're able to help so many more children almost through filtering down what you've learned over the years through all these practitioners and doing your courses? And
I didn't intend my career to go the way it did. I was a head for 10 years of a 3-form entry infant school and absolutely loved it. And what I really miss, I left in 2009, so I've been out of it for quite a long time. But I miss the community aspect, because when you've been there for 10 years, you know nearly all of the families. I used to know all of the children in my school by name. I did loads. I used to get in trouble with my governors all the time, because if somebody was off, I would cover their class, because I just loved the teaching bit of it. And also you find out how your school runs from the children primarily. So I was always out at the beginning of the day welcoming everybody in. I was always out at the end of the day seeing everybody out. It was really important that my school felt like a community. And then in the midst of that, I had 3 children of my own and didn't think that having your own children would actually change how I thought as a practitioner, but it massively changed how I thought as a practitioner. I also had 3 boys fairly close together. And they were we could do a whole podcast on gender because that's another fascination of mine, but they were very typical of type. So my 3 boys are very kind of football-y, laddie type children. And I was just really occurring to me that what my boys would do at the weekend or in the evenings, or what their interests were so different to what we were asking children to do at school. And so I'm basically saying, I recognise that my children behave like this when they're not in school, but then for a lot of the time that they are, I'm asking them to behave in a way that's completely biologically different from how they are outside of that. So that changed the culture of what we did as a school in terms of staff training, expectations, and also a lot of challenge around our gendered expectations of children. We know that in school situations or nursery situations that girls get over 70% more positive affirmation for sedentary behaviour. So loads of statistics out about how our expectations of girls and boys are subconsciously different. And what we do is reinforce the gender stereotype subconsciously just because that's what we think is going to happen. I was in a setting the other day and a practitioner actually said, "Come on, where's my tidy up girls?" And the boys went and sat on the carpet and the girls tidied up. And afterwards I said, "Can I just chat to you about that?" And she was literally, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that." We are
it's
tied
ingrained
up
into the subconscious.
It's all that subconscious language. So it's feeding that in as well. And as a practitioner then, constantly challenging yourself and your team to not only be better at what you do and have lots of different ideas about how you can help and support children, but also challenge your own preconceptions and practice. Because I'm a different practitioner now than I was 30 years ago, and rightly so.
And I guess the gendered play thing, it's putting them in box. It's another form of boxes.
Yeah.
And I really loved your Instagram live with Jenny on gendered play. And what was it called? Unicorns and glitter and
trucks and
dirt or something.
Yeah.
And it's just break it. Obviously, your boys were typical boyish.
But what's really interesting about that for me is they were not particularly gendered until they got into kind of education. So we as human beings then will want to fit in. So we tend to look for and we do that as adults. We you often talk about finding your tribe. Well, as children, you want to find your tribe. So preschool, glittery tights, nail varnish, unicorns, along with trucks, baby dolls, action men, all just going on. The minute you begin to find a tribe, then that tribe just keep reinforcing all the tribal bits of your tribe. So then it became football kits, and I don't want to put glittery tights on, and I'm not going to wear the tutu anymore. Even though, again, for me, as their dad, I didn't have any of those really typically masculine traits. Didn't do football, didn't do sport, did a lot of, you'd probably find me watching the Great British Bake Off or the Great British Sunday rather than you would watching like Match of the Day. So their primary role model was not given those messages. I mean, football wasn't on in our house. We didn't go and do that sort of thing. I was never a lad's lad, much to the horror of my dad, but that's a whole different story. But so for my boys, it was really, and I see it with lots of other children, it's when they get into that culture of finding a tribe that suddenly they shed a lot of the kind of genderless behaviour and really started to become more gendered in their behaviour. And it wasn't their parents that were pushing that agenda, and it wasn't even their educators. It was the society or the societal attitudes of the other children they're playing with. And that's why you end up with pink and blue and girls and boys, when actually, when they're born, apart from the obvious, there's very little difference.
Yeah.
Minerva Place. Independent retirement living, just moments from Lynn Village Centre.
A collection of 45 beautifully designed luxury apartments with the addition of a flexible domestic support package tailored to suit your needs.
Prices start from just £210,000. Our show apartment opens in October.
Minerva Place Lim. Start your journey at villafont.com.
It's really important with early years not to push things on children. Just let them be themselves.
But even that expectation around all boys will be boys or typical boys. So again, in a setting and so, in a staff room, and somebody said, "Have you seen your list for next year?" This is before the summer. And the adult was like, "No, why are they out?" And she's like, "Yeah, you're not going to be happy." And she's like, "Oh, why? Tell me." She said, "No, you need to go and get your list." And then she came back in with her list for the following year. And she's like, "Oh my God, so many boys, got 2/3 boys." And then there was like a collective, "Oh, you'll be all right, we'll get you through it." And she's like, "I don't know what I'm going to do 2/3. And I thought, that's really interesting. You don't know these children. You've never met these children. You are basically making assumptions around gender. And also, if you've got 2/3 boys, you wait till you've got them and see what their preference is and what their behaviour is, and then regardless of whether it's 2/3, 99%, 10%, you create a learning environment for the children who are in it regardless of their gender. But even that conversation taking place in a staff room about it's going to be horrendous, they're all boys, lets you know that actually the message is still well ingrained,
projecting already,
and everybody agreeing. And so that'll be the cohort that goes through the nursery or through the school where it's like, "Oh, so many boys," rather than saying, "Let's create an environment that's unique for these children and let's forget the fact they're boys."
Because when you project in that way, you could create a situation through your projections of a more difficult
you expect it to be difficult, and you expect behaviour to be challenging, so there you're looking for it, and the minute you see it, you kind of reinforcing it. And so and again, is 97% of the early years workforce, it might even be 98 now, are female, and we know that for all of us we have an internal gender schema, so your perception of you and your gender, and so much subconscious is attached to that perception of who you are and what what means about your gender. So we've got, on average, 51% of a carpet full of children will actually be male, not female. So you've got predominantly female workforce with a predominantly female concept of gender who are subconsciously projecting onto groups of children where the majority statistically are not having the same gender schema. So you've already got friction in terms of what you say and how you say it. And if you think that you deliver and create spaces and invent activities that link to your own preference, then you're going to produce a more female feeling space with a more female, stereotypically, attitude to it, because you, by the nature of your own gender, are subconsciously female. So it's fascinating and frustrating and interesting all at the same time.
All at the same time. So you might have answered this in some of your other answers, but this is another one from our team, a question they've got for you. What would be one piece of advice that you would give to a nursery?
It's, for me, all about the uniqueness of the child. So that's what it's taken me kind of 30 years to get to. So it's boring down into, regardless of whether they're boys or they're girls or they're tall or they're short, it doesn't matter. It's about spaces that we create that value the authenticity of children. And again, as a parent, I love my boys to bits, and I was really pleased that I produced, until they went into mainstream, children with character. Because I think one word you would use to describe all three of my children is that they've got character. I mean, that's the sort of thing a teacher would say to parents, even especially about my eldest. You know, he brings a lot of character to the space. I also made the interesting decision to send my boys to my school, so I was their head teacher. And my eldest was basically, that's my dad. Yeah, my dad's the head. Yeah, hi, Dad. My middle one would call me Mr. Clegg and look at his feet all the time. He's Mr. Clegg, Mr. Clegg. And then my youngest one was kind of a combination of the two. With my eldest, I remember when he was in year 1, so he was 6, a supply teacher was in, a regular supply teacher, and she came down and said, I just need to have a word with you at the end of the day. She'd been in his class. And I was like, yes, go on. And she said, well, end of the day, she said, I lined them all up and had a letter to take home. And I said, open your book bags and I'm going to pop a letter in. And she said, and I'm thinking, where is this going? And she said, I got halfway down the line and there's a child with a closed book bag. So I said, open your book bag, Alfie. And at that point, you know, it's my child. Open your book bag, Alfie. You need to put a letter in it. And he said to me, my dad wrote the letter, so I don't think I need to take it home for him to read. And I said, really? I said, I really hope you said, open your bag. And I didn't. I just went, yes. All right, Alfie, fair enough, and moved on. So even at 6, he was being a smart aleck. So all I wanted when he went to school or nursery, was that the people who cared for him understood the Alfiness of Alfie, regardless of what that was, and valued it. And I think I hadn't, until it was my own child, quite understood the depth of that you feel as a parent. I mean, even in schools, things like, parents are a nightmare, the drop of this precious bundle. And of course, they're a nightmare because it is the most precious and important thing that you've got. So when you can peel back your own subconscious and conscious expectations of what children should be, would be, might be, and actually say, right, I want to try and look at all of these children as unique individuals, because anybody listening to this will know we as adults are unique in our feelings, our thoughts. I mean, we have lots of shared experience, but you know, you never want anybody sitting inside your head, you know, thinking all the thoughts that you think and all the emotions that you go through. And children are no different to that. So it's about saying, right, I need to try and create a space and forge relationships that are as unique as I can make them. And then we are getting these children at the very, very beginning of their journey. And as I said earlier on, they learn habits really quickly. So they learn to associate emotions, language, and we are at the stage where we can really influence that. So the more that we can support them in managing behaviour, acknowledging emotions, looking after their mental health and well-being at this stage in their journey, the better equipped they will be. But to do that, you've also got to do that yourself, because if you are not looking after your own mental health and well-being, or really understanding the development of children, then you're not going to be in a good place to put that into practice.
To hold the space for them. So the uniqueness, understanding the uniqueness of the children, but also looking after the uniqueness within you so that you can hold that space for them in the best way possible. So that was a brilliant answer, and I'm sure the team will love that.
I mean, it's not always easily done. What we're talking about here are quite complex things to do, and I think that's why this is a career, and it's become a career for me, and it's a vocation. So sometimes I'll talk to people and say, oh, I remember once many years ago when I first started doing consultancy, I went to do some training at a nursery, and we did it outside. It was lovely, and I was just chatting to the team, and I said to this one particular practitioner, what made you go into it? And she basically said, I was always going to do hair and beauty, but the hair and beauty course was full, but there were spaces on the childcare course, so I did childcare. And it was not like, and now I love it, was like, well, I just did childcare. So I think it needs to be, it's so important what we do, because we are literally, and it sounds really grandiose, but we're helping to shape little lives. That it needs to be a passion, and it's not something you can do because hair and beauty is full. It's something that you've got to accept, that you're going to be on a long, fascinating, interesting, fulfilling and frustrating journey, but it won't end until your career working with children ends. And it's complex, but it's interesting.
So if somebody out there is on the fence about working in early years, not sure whether they want to do it or not, what would be your argument for it being a really rewarding career to convince them?
It's not just about teaching or interacting with children. And there's a common misconception that little children are easy because they're little. And that's usually a misconception from somebody that either hasn't got a child, has never worked with a 2-year-old, or hasn't never had experience working with little children, because little children are complex. Because what they haven't got are a lot of the filters and the social norms that older children choose to comply to or not. And also they can't articulate often in the same way that older children can. So a lot of what you do when you're working with very little children is about guesswork and detective work, and it's about trying to create spaces that allow children to be. So I have found I've never had a dull day. I found I had a job that I have absolutely loved, and literally to be 30 years into a career and say I've loved every minute of it. Was it frustrating? Yes. Is it emotionally taxing? Yes. You work with little children, but you also work with families. You work with children in need. You work with children who can become ill. There are all sorts of things that are, as a human being, you find challenging and difficult. But what it never is dull. And what there never is a lack of something new to find out. And apart from the fact that they just make you laugh all the time, even if the saying is your name Mr. Poohhead, or if you've got a spot on your chin, or just one asked me once, did I live under the sink? And I think that just, they never fail to amuse you. Will they suck the life out of you on a daily basis? Yes. Do you get to the end of the day sometimes when you've worked a full day with very young children and literally feel like somebody's unplugged you and your batteries are out? Yeah. But never to the point for me where I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. It was always like, right. And when things go wrong, and they will, because children are different and each year is different because different personalities come, it's really good to get into the kind of habit of, well, it all went disastrously wrong. Fair enough. Nobody died. What do I do differently to make it work better, rather than saying, well, it was that boy's behaviour, or it was that girl's behaviour, or it's I'm a boy heavy group. It's about, right, if it's not working, I'm the conductor of this orchestra, so what am I doing that I could do differently just to make it work better?
I like that metaphor about the orchestra, because you've got all the different instruments.
Yeah. And some need a little bit of tuning, some play really well together, some not so well together. But yeah, and it literally is about conducting and listening and watching. So
your TED Talk, Subversive Teaching, Educators Undercover, which I've said already was just fascinating, just had me laughing. Well, that was one of my questions. So I know you've mentioned about wanting to be a Blue Peter presenter. So you've stood on stage lots of people. You've done some pretty big deal things. Has that confidence always been within you, or is it something that you've learned, or is it the passion that you have that makes it easier? What's that experience like, talking in front of that many people?
It doesn't. I always get nervous, And the TED Talk, particularly because it was being streamed live, and you have 15 minutes, and once it's recorded, and you have a big timer in front of you that counts down. And also, my wife and my eldest son had come to see me deliver it live, but my brother and my mum and his entire family and all my nieces and nephews were all live streaming via YouTube, and I was getting these messages on my phone while I'm waiting. Also, I was introduced by the voice of Siri, so the guy that is, or the original Siri. So that was all a little bit surreal, and the room is completely black, and then you're just lit on the stage. So it felt a bit like a dream after I'd done it. So I've done lots of things that I get nervous about because they're important. I think I get asked to do them because obviously the passion must come out, because I've also sat and listened to people who are really dull and you wouldn't want them back. But there's always been an element of me that was a bit of a show off. And I think what I've done is that's probably what's pushed me towards saying yes to this type of thing. But what you try and do is hone the skills so that you don't just look like you're showing off. You just feel comfortable in a space where you can get up and talk about. I think the other thing for me when I'm talking about early years is that I'm very passionate about it, but also I talk about things that as I understand it. So I've got a huge bank of knowledge that I can talk about. I mean, it's my knowledge, and it might not always be, I don't know 100% about everything, but I know what I know. So I enjoy that. And there's so much humour in early years, so much humour. And again, my kind of delivery style is just to try and wrap maybe some of the more difficult messages in a bit of humour. Because when you stand up and say to somebody, right, see this, that's awful for these reasons, 1, 2, 3. If you do that, you're going to be like, hey, hang on a minute. That's really personally affronting. But if you say, right, funny story, this happened and then this happened, what you're basically doing is exactly the same process, but people laugh. And they say to me all the time, that's me. You know, when you said about that woman who did that, that's me. And I was like, yeah. And most of it is also me at some point in my career. But I think the ability to be able to reflect humorously, because very few people, and nobody really that I've met, sets out to actively not be good at what they're doing, or actively, try and make children's development not as effective as it could be. You just do what you know you can do until you know different, and then you do different. So sometimes being able to reflect and say, I mean, I used to do this, this and this. I mean, some of the things I did as a probationer were horrifying. I mean, they weren't bad in the way that you were harming children, but just the routines that I had in place, the expectations that I had. We used to start every day with these poor reception children with their name in dots on the back of a cereal packet, because of course laminators and printers and computers weren't in existence in schools when I first started. We had a Banda generator, but we had tracing paper and a cereal packet with a name on with little paper clips. And every morning, every child sat down and traced their name, first job of the day, when they couldn't even form letters. And it's like saying to children, come in to Mr. Clegg's class and let's give you a task that reminds you how dull school can be, that focuses on the things that you can't do. All because I was told that by the end of the year, every child had to be able to write their Christian name and their surname, and that was going to be a marker of how successful I had been as a practitioner. So it's challenging loads of the things that we do before we knew better, and then embracing some of the thinking, but as long as it's grounded in research and fact and not just trend. Because I was saying earlier about social media, there's a lot of trend stuff that now spreads really quickly because of social media, which is more about the adults than it is about the children, and actually makes very little difference to how children learn and what they do.
It's just that comparison thing, isn't it, that runs through with social media. You're just constantly comparing, and
or somebody
you're not
telling you
enough.
Need to be accredited. You've got to have this accreditation or that accreditation, be accredited in standing on your head with a bucket in the corner. So some accreditation is really valuable because it impacts on child development, but some is about the aesthetics of a space, which there is research around why spaces need to look like they need to look like, and the idea of the kind of more neutral backgrounds has got science behind it, but some people push that to the nth degree and say, right, you need to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds for your space to look like this, and this will give you an accreditation. But based on what? How does that make you a better practitioner, and how does it impact on the development of those children?
Just checking there's not like sales reasons behind why somebody's pushing those
things.
things.
And there are lots. And check who's accrediting you? Who's giving you this accreditation? What is their qualification or background, or are they just somebody that's decided that they're going to put together a scheme for which you can be accredited?
So we've talked a lot about early years in itself. Let's talk about intergenerational care.
Okay.
So you featured in the Channel 4 documentary All People's Homes for 4-year-olds, which was BAFTA award winning. So amazing. So why is intergenerational care so beneficial for children and older people when it's done properly?
Oh, it is amazing.
Well, we're talking about this as well because we've got our new nursery coming in Lim, which will be later this year. Yeah. So we're
visited
excited.
The site.
Yes, you did.
So as a head teacher and as a teacher, we'd done stuff like always at harvest, you went and gave a basket. You took children down Christmas, the children's choir went to the local old people's home, sang a couple of songs. So it was occasional and it was every now and then, and the old people obviously loved it. What I was not aware of was the scientific research that has been done extensively internationally around the impact that it has both on the development of children and the regression and development of older adults. And it is quite astounding when you look at it, which is the premise for the whole show, was that this research had been made available, and initially it was all about the old people. Can we make old people's outcomes, or older adults, which we call them, better? And then more research came out about actually there's a huge impact on the children in terms of not only social and emotionally, but academically. So the premise for the older adults was that it made, it's not rocket science when you think about it. Basically, you get to a stage in your development where if you are in an old people's home, and the one that we filmed in Nottingham was amazing. It was a proper community. It had a yoga studio, a pool room, an artist studio. It had trees in the internal. It had a supermarket. You didn't have to go anywhere. But interesting, what the older adults were saying was, you never have to leave here. So in some ways, it feels like you're coming. You know you're old. You don't have to go back out into the community. You don't have to get a bus. Everything you need is here. So for some of them, it felt a little bit like you were never going to go anywhere other than that. And also, you can get into a stage where when you're older, you become a little bit invisible, because still our society looks at people who are in that age group and doesn't always value who they are and what they can be. So a lot of your kind of mental health can deteriorate, and also your physical health deteriorates, because again, a lot of them would say we put trackers on them to find out how much before the children came they were walking around during the day, and a lot of their day was spent getting up, sitting down, watching a lot of television, or going to the community room, sitting down. So they were actually on their feet very little. So then they were getting muscle deterioration, coordination deterioration. As you would see on the show if you saw it, some of them had sticks that they used to walk with at the beginning, no sticks by the end, even running in sports day. So there's a big link between how you feel about yourself and how that impacts on your physicality. And the children are an excuse. And like we were saying before, they don't let you get away with anything. So when we were in this space working together, the children would go up to one another and say, come on, we're going to play this. Come with me. You're going to do this now. And of course, the older adults were mainly saying, oh, okay then. So they were using the joints way more. They were thinking, they were laughing more, they were interacting, but also it reminded a lot of the older adults of their own experience of having children and grandchildren. So there's a huge amount of warmth. And then the children themselves, we did assessments around their language development. So when they first started working with the older adults, their frequency of language, the amount of vocabulary they used, the complexity of the vocabulary, the sentence structure. And then at the end of the project, and all of the children had made progress. Some had made vast progress and some had made some progress, but all of them showed language development. They showed development in terms of their mathematical concepts and skills, personal, social. We did a very kind of rudimentary how do you feel, how happy are you? So again, the children and the adults all reporting a significant difference, and that was in a relatively short space of time. And for this particular project, they actually had the nursery was inside the old people's home. So every day, 9 till 3, including lunch, we had breaks more for the adults than for the children, but the children joined the adults and the adults could choose to be there or not. Lunchtimes were amazing because they talked over lunch, but also we found the diet of the older adults improved because they would have like, I don't know, sweet corn and broccoli.
Yeah.
And the children would be like, I want broccoli. And you got old adults saying, right, well, come on, let's go and have it together. So their diet improved. Just, it was one of the nicest projects I've ever worked on. And then subsequently, I've worked with lots of other organisations setting up that kind of project in very different ways. Some very occasional, some more regular. But again, the benefits are huge.
And it's really important to do it properly though, isn't it?
Yes, it is really important to do it properly. So there are basically, if you do an occasional visit to some old people, it will brighten their day, but you won't see any long-term impact. So regular is important. But also in terms of safeguarding, there are lots of elements of working with any group of people that you need to take into account. But what we found was that some of our older adults have also got expectations of children that are linked to 60, 70 years ago. And sometimes, although nothing drastic, but the language and behaviour of the older adults was the thing that was a concern. No, I don't mean language as in swearing. I mean language as in how you would maybe chastise a younger child who was doing something that you felt was inappropriate. Is not how we would do it today. And also, funny but not funny things like they would palm them money, so they'd come out with like 20p or 50p or a pound coin, like where have you got that from, or whoever gave it to me, or sweets was the other thing we had to say to the older adults. It's lovely that you want to do that, but you can't keep slipping them sweets. A, they're a choking hazard, B, somebody might have an allergy, but C, it's just kind of not appropriate.
Were they receptive to that?
Yes, they are, because they understand. I mean, they think it's all ridiculous. One of the big discussion we had with one of the settings that I worked with was about, it's that agreement of the adults want to hug the children a lot, and the children want to sit on the knees of the adults because they see them as that kind of grandparent role. Yeah. So in terms of safeguarding in a setting, you'd be really clear about what was appropriate in terms of your physical contact with children and what isn't. But then when you're taking it into an older adults community, then it was just about having discussions with the older adults and the parents. Yeah. And the children about what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate.
Really important.
Whilst allowing them to forge these really close relationships that they want to forge with them.
And it's so lovely because I guess older times, families would stay so close together. So grandparents would be close to their children and grandchildren. Yeah. Whereas now that isn't always the case. You've got children that work maybe in a different town or a different country even. So sometimes the older adults, the elderly, don't have that connection to their own families. So it's giving them almost a sense of purpose still. So they've got something to look forward to, and they are actually contributing.
And getting loads of rewards. I remember one of the projects I worked in, there was a doll's house and there was no furniture in it. And there were two girls on this occasion that were playing a kind of a game, and they're putting the dolls to bed, and there was no bed. And so one of the adults went away and came back the following day having made a bed out of a toothpaste box with matchsticks stuck onto it and a little blanket inside. And she said she'd been up till about 11 o'clock at night just making this bed for these girls so that they could have it in their house. And to be fair, the girls had moved on. So when she came and did the "I've made you a bed," the girls were a bit like, "Oh, okay, anyway, see ya." But for her, just having a purpose, and she really enjoyed doing it, and everybody else was like, "Oh, that's amazing." So that in itself, just having that opportunity only arose because of her interaction with these young children. And so that there are endless possibilities for that to happen.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about the intergenerational care?
I would just say that I would encourage any early years setting to look into it. I mean, there's lots and lots of research out there now. There's a website called United for All Ages. They do lots of really good signposting to things like policy documentation and examples of how it can take place. But the impact was so significant for both the adults and the children, and also the wider, just watching that interaction is really lovely. But even things like grip strength in the older adults improved, their level of depression went significantly down. So if something as simple as just spending some time building relationships between two different elements of our community can have such a positive impact, it's free and it's rewarding, why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah, which we are, which we're so excited about. And it's a natural progression, really, because the team behind Back to the Garden, it's my parents, Jeannie and Stuart, and then the McGough Group. And the McGough Group specialise in care homes. They've got the new care facilities, and they're very successful, and they're really well respected as these care home providers. And then creating the nursery, it just seems like a natural evolution to do something. It's good
synergy to do that.
Yeah, and it's so exciting, the space that they've created with the indoor-outdoor elements, shared gardens. I don't think they're fully mixed together. They've got their own spaces, but these communal areas with the fire pits. Which is almost
best of both worlds. And I think if I ever end up in an old people's home, I hope that it's one that does intergenerational care, so I can get my guitar out in my 80s and sing Five Little Sparkle Frogs.
I said to Mum and Dad, they've like sorted themselves.
Just joking. Move you into that space.
Joking, I'm very sorry, Mum and Dad. They're in their 70s though, but Mum and Dad are amazing. They just will never stop, I don't think, and it keeps them young. And we're all guitarists as well, so we should all get together.
Absolutely, a band, that'd be great.
So we've covered so much, but I'd really like to talk about your latest venture, which is the app, My First 5 Years, which you've co-founded with Jenny Johnson and our very own Anne Statham, who works in the nursery. She's our child development expert. She's working with you on this. Can you talk about it, why it's going to be helpful for parents? I've obviously downloaded it for him. So I'm really excited to have that. Sell it to me.
It's really exciting. It's going really well. It was a lockdown project, and it was just, again, fate and synergy in that I was in a really fortunate position that my diary was booked up about 18 months to 2 years in advance. And so I'd done various bits of work with Jenny before when she owned Kids Aloud, and she rang me over lockdown because lockdown hit, and I do conference work, in-setting work, so everything dropped out of my diary, all the international work, because obviously we were 2 years in a pandemic. And she said, look, I've got this seed of an idea. What do you think? And I was like, right, I completely get this. This would be amazing. And she said, would you like to do it with me? Now, any other time, I couldn't have done it. I would have had to have said, I've got too many commitments in my diary, I just can't do it. But because it was the pandemic, I was like, right, nothing else going on, let's do it. So for the first 6 months or so, we did it remotely via Zoom. And the basic concept was, if we could give parents even just a little bit of the knowledge that early years practitioners have in parent speak, it might help them to be way less anxious about being a parent, but also celebrate the small stuff. Because if you ask parents to talk about milestones for child development, they'll talk about things like walking, talking, potty training, weaning. But actually, to get from being born to walking, there are so many really crucial milestones that your children hit. And I think what you then can do as a parent is relax a bit and think, well, I can clearly see they're making progress. So we're nowhere near walking yet, but I'm not even going to worry about that because I'm really reassured that these children are making good progress. So what we've done is to split child development into...
He's wriggling. He's loving the sound of your voice.
Good. 6 streams. So we've got 6 broad streams, which are things like gross motor, fine motor, language development, that sort of thing. And then within those streams, we've identified about 1,300 skills that children will go through in the first 5 years. And what you basically do is, if it's from birth, you start at the very beginning, or you can plot your child on anywhere through their 5-year journey and ask you some questions and say, right, in terms of language development, where are you up to? Can your child do this, this and this? So you do a little bit of onboarding, and then basically what the app says is, right, you're here. Research tells us this is likely to be next. This is why it's important. Here are some activities you can do to support it. Here's a bit more in-depth reading if you want it. If you don't, then you don't have to. And then when you think your child can really do this thing, mark it as mastered, that pops into a little scrapbook, which is like a parent's learning journey. Really, you can add anything to your scrapbook anytime you want. It's a bit like a cross between a learning journey, Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
And then basically you can walk with your child through their unique journey. So no two children are the same. We don't use ages and stages. So it doesn't say at 3 months old, your child should be, because there are loads of baby apps say that. And the should is a terrible word because you think, well, mine isn't.
Yeah.
So it says, right, your child is here, regardless of their age. This is what they're doing. This is what they are likely to do next, or possibly this. This is what to look out for. This is why it's significant. So loads of activities to support your child's development, but they are specific to your child. So what happens when you open the app is that you will get, we call it a mix of 6. So for ease, we say to you every day that you open the app, here's 6 activities across all 6 streams that are linked to exactly where your child is now. So you've told us in language development your child is here, so we're only showing you activities linked to exactly where your child is at. These are not kind of generic, anybody can do them. But then you can go into the activity bank and there are thousands of activities in there. And the other thing about the activities is they've all been written by child development experts. So they're not Pinterest. They are literally linked to the statement of development. So what you're basically getting is a unique journey for your child, which has got then activities that will support that journey and information for you as a parent, but directly laser focused through these 6 streams of learning on exactly where your child is now. So you could have twins and you would get different information potentially, because there might be different stages on their journey. So it's really about, as I've talked about earlier, the uniqueness of the child.
Yeah. Can we just touch on that as well, like why it's okay for your child to develop at different times compared to other children? Because, again, it's another thing for parents to think either, oh, why is my child not doing that at this stage? Or my child's doing,
which is really hard.
Kind of like...
we call it in-house comparanoia. That idea that you become paranoid about the comparison. And also I was talking to Jenny the other day about the fact that my aforementioned eldest walked at about 9 months, and he was the first to walk in our NCT group. And I can't tell you how overjoyed we were at he's walking. Like, I mean, it's a nightmare because once they're walking, they destroy your entire environment. But my middle son didn't walk till he was 16 months. So we had one that walked at 9, one that walked at 16. They're both in their 20s now. They can both walk, they can both run, and so by the time our middle son wasn't walking, we were starting to think, hang on a minute, your eldest walked at 9 months, everybody else is walking, and you get that. And of course, if you've got concerns, what the app's not saying is, never worry about anything. If you've got concerns, you can speak to a health professional. But things like walking, even things like sleep. So we do loads of work around sleep because it's a real concern for parents. But we know from the latest scientific research that children are biologically programmed not to sleep through. But yet parents use language like, are they a good baby? Now, a good baby implies they sleep through the night, but that implies a baby who is actually doing what is biologically normal or typical is not good. And actually we then as parents strive to get our children, that's the goal, get them to sleep through. And actually the likelihood is, or the reality from the majority of parents, is that your child is not going to sleep through. Now, if you know that and you understand why, as a parent you don't go in with the, well, why is it not working? Let's try another sleep training routine. Let's try another one. In fact, one of our content team was sharing a latest bit of research about sleep training that had been done in America, and on this research that they did, the sleep training ended up getting the average parent 8 minutes more sleep than children who weren't sleep trained. And what the research was saying, which was interesting, is the psychology for the parent is more beneficial because they feel like they're doing something to aid the sleeping through, but actually in the majority of cases sleep training only buys you 8 more minutes if you're lucky. So so the app's got full of fascinating stuff like that, which then say this is the headline. We'll just give you the headline if you want it, but if you want to know where we got the headline from, and everything we say is backed by science and research from at least 2 sources, so you know that we do have some opinion pieces, but they're clearly opinion pieces. Everything else that we state as being fact is fact in terms of the most up-to-date research.
It's just so reassuring to have everything in that one place, like we were saying about Instagram and all the different things out there, whereas you just got that one place where you can go and there's everything that you need.
And everything that we're talking about you needing to support your child's development is probably in your kitchen cupboard or in the park. There is very little that you actually ever need to buy. I mean, we all buy way too much stuff, but there's very little stuff that you actually need to buy as a parent in terms of developing, children.
Yeah.
We just tend to buy it because it's shiny and we think we should. And
yeah, I mean, I'm feeling that at the moment. Like, I only want to get what we actually need.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, it's that thing of, it makes you feel guilty that you're not getting that thing or that thing, whereas actually there's only a very small amount of things that they really need at this stage.
Absolutely. And the more interpretive the resource is, and the more ways you can interpret it, then the more valuable it is. And a lot of stuff we buy children is just like single identification, single use.
Yeah.
So again, it's just about trying to reassure parents that it's a difficult job, it's complex, but there's loads of science and research out there that really talks about how you can best support your child's development, and we're going to give you that in really short, to the point, parent speak language. We'll do all the unpicking and unpacking for you. If you want to delve into, if that's how your brain works, then, because we talked about, even on the My First 5 Years team, we've got people who were like, even if there was an article, I wouldn't go and read it. If you've said it, I believe you, and that's enough. And then we've got others like, it's fascinating, I'd love to read the research on that.
Yeah.
So it's trying to appeal to all parents.
What a great thing to have come out of lockdown.
Well, yeah, it's a real positive, and it's going really well. So it's getting lots of really positive press, and the people who are using it, it's on the App Store live at the moment, and for a little while longer it's completely free, and then it will be a subscription app. But we're getting lots of really positive feedback from the people who are using it, in just that it's making sense, and they are feeling the momentum of their child's progress, and also just noticing things, and how many of them say, and on my WhatsApp group I'm like, you wouldn't believe she's just done this, and that's linked to this, this and this, and things you never thought you'd know but are really fascinating.
I can't wait. Can't wait to start using
You
it.
can give me some feedback when you do.
Yeah, I will.
Use the feedback.
So we're going into rapid fire now. Is there anything else that you feel like I've not covered that you'd like to talk about?
I covered loads.
Okay, so the rapid fire. So if money, time and logistics were no object, what would you create for children?
Oh, that's not a rapid question.
It doesn't have to be rapid.
Money, time and logistics.
So like anything.
I think if we could reorganise all the training around child development, because it all goes back to how we are trained to support children in their development. So I would have a massive upheaval in terms of the government approach to how we work with children, and I would link it to child development, and we'd end up with probably something that's way more like a Scandinavian or Australian method, where children are valued and child development is valued, and people who are going to work with children are taught about the important stuff and not necessarily the legs crossed, arms folded, fingers on lips stuff.
Love that answer. What rights should children innately have?
All rights. So children are small human beings and they should have autonomy. And I think there is a real view in society of the educator and the educated, so regardless of what role you're in, so the carer and the cared for, and actually, which is what my dissertation is about, so I could talk to you for hours about this, the idea that we are all kind of actors in one space. So although we might be adults and they might be children, we're all human beings. We're all bringing different aspects of what we know and can do into a learning space. So I think children should have the right to be equal as a human being within a space, and that we as adults also need to reflect on what children bring, rather than thinking we bring and they learn. It's about thinking we all bring and we all learn. Just my knowledge is different to theirs, but theirs is equally as valuable.
Oh, love that too. Okay, children are... I finished this sentence. Children are...
Amazing.
And That's it. We've come to the end. So thank you so much for sharing this time with us. I've loved every minute. I've been soaking everything up, learning lots as well for me personally, and I'm sure our team at the nursery will love this, and all the listeners and viewers who engage in the podcast. So thank you so much. Where can people find all your offerings and connect with you?
So my first 5 years is just mffy.com, and ABC Does is ABC for Alistair Bryce-Clegg. Does, because I do all sorts of stuff, .com. And all the usual social media platforms.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave us a review in iTunes or on your podcast app. Follow Back to the Garden Childcare on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's subject. And for everything mentioned in today's episode, you can head to the show notes at backtothegardenchildcare.com/podcast. And if there's someone you know who would love to hear this episode, share it with them today. Send them a link, screenshot the app, or just chat about it. This podcast is recorded at LBS Studios. Until next time, in the words of Joni Mitchell, we are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden.